My name is Velma Reynolds. I'm 72 years old. I live alone in an old white wooden house in Charleston, South Carolina. I was a wife for 28 years, and a mother. Well, Mom, I still am, even if sometimes they forget that. Now tell me something. You've given yourself too much, and you only realized that you became too useful when it was too late? Because I thought everything was right, that the love I gave came back in the form of respect. But that day, what I heard in the backyard broke something inside me, and the strangest thing is that there was no scream, just my breath held, a knife inside my chest, and the certainty they don't see me as a mother anymore. They see me as labor. Maybe you felt it too, that feeling that you're loved while serving, but that, if it stops serving, becomes a burden. Well, I understand this feeling well, and if you're here, maybe you're carrying the same silence that I've carried for decades. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened that week, and how a silent 72-year-old lady was able to turn a marriage upside down, without raising her voice. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. Sometimes, what really hurts us isn't what they say to our face. It's what they say thinking we're not listening. I was in the kitchen, going through my deceased husband's recipe book, when I heard the phrase that still echoes inside me. Velma will take care of all the children during the party. She won't even realize she's being used. It was as if someone had pulled the rug out from under my feet. I froze. It was the voice of my future daughter-in-law and her sister, laughing, planning how I would be the free solution to entertain 15 children at my own son's wedding. And the worst? They spoke so naturally, as if I were not a person, as if I were just a useful shadow. They didn't know that I was standing there, behind the curtain, with my heart tight as an old wooden box. And if you're here with me right now, if this story has touched you a little, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. Because today, more than telling a memory, I am going to open a wound that I carried in silence. And if that pain was yours too, then you're not alone. I'm here. And this story, it's for us. I remember well the day my son Daniel was born. It was a humid April morning in 1980, and Charleston's municipal hospital felt colder than usual. I was alone in the waiting room when I felt the first strong contraction. Frank, my husband, had gone to get a change of clothes and got stuck in King Street traffic. So it was I, with the strength of God and the grip of my hands on the edge of the stretcher, who brought my boy into the world. Since that day, everything I have done, every step, every choice, has his name in the middle. I worked for more than 20 years as an assistant in an elementary school, and at night, I did sewing for the outside. When Daniel wanted to study engineering, I sold my rings to pay for the first college tuition. We didn't have much, but I knew how to multiply the little with love. There was a night, I remember it as if it were now, when I finished an entire baby layette at 3 a.m, with my eyes burning, but my heart calm, because the next day, Daniel was going to present a project and needed a new shirt, and I made that shirt, white with an embroidered collar, as if it were for a king. When he graduated, he cried on my shoulder and said that I was the reason for everything. I believed it, because when we really love, we believe even in what is not said with words. And that's why, years later, when he introduced me to Cassidy, I welcomed her with open arms. Cassidy was an elegant girl, much younger than Daniel, and with a very practical way of looking at life. At first, I thought she was a little cold, but little by little, I offered what I knew how to give: care. I taught her my peach cobbler recipe, made a crochet shawl for her to use at Thanksgiving dinner, gave her a porcelain that belonged to my mother. The first Christmas together, she called me second mom, and that, for me, was like a medal. I remember looking at that girl and thinking, she may have come from another world, but I'm going to make her feel at home. I did with her what I always did for everyone. I welcomed. I gave myself, with faith that love transforms everything. When they announced the wedding, it was natural for me to offer to help. Leave the buffet to me. I make the food, decorate the tables. It's going to be all beautiful. They accepted with enthusiasm. I felt useful, alive, needed. The week before the wedding, my house felt like a production center. The kitchen was full of trays, the smell of pecans mixed with burnt sugar, the cakes cooling at the window like in ancient times. Daniel passed by from time to time, with that hurry of someone who always has something on his cell phone. Is everything okay, Mom? Need help? I smiled and said no. It was my way of giving back everything I thought he still was for me. But now, sitting alone remembering these scenes, I ask myself, was it all just convenience for them? Has all that love become an obligation? I ask you with a heavy heart, has it ever happened that you give everything for someone and in the end, realize that they were just using you? That you were only useful but not essential? If you've ever experienced something like this, comment below with a word that represents you. It can be, I've lived it. It's true. What a strength. I read each one. And you're not alone, see? Because when I heard that phrase in the backyard, she won't even notice that she's being used. It was as if everything I told you just now had turned to dust. The sewing nights, the embroidery, the vows of gratitude, the crochet shawl, the second mother. I, who thought I had built a bridge with love, I realized that, on the other side, there were only people waiting to cross with dirty shoes. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry at the time. I didn't make a scandal. I just closed the curtain. And I started to think, what they didn't know is that when a woman like me is silent, it's because you're preparing something. And at that moment, without them knowing, the marriage began to fall apart. But not with fire or fury, with silence. And that's when everything started to change. It was an ordinary morning, one of those that begin with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of the radio quietly in the kitchen. I was chopping carrots for the potato salad I was going to serve at the buffet. The knife went back and forth on the wooden board with rhythm, almost like an old song that my fingers already knew by heart. Outside, you could hear the singing of birds and the noise of leaves dancing with the wind of early spring, until the voices came, two laughing out loud, Cassidy and her sister Hannah, who had arrived from Dallas to help with the preparations. They were outside, sitting on the back porch, right next to the open kitchen window. I didn't want to hear it, but I didn't want to run away either. I stood there, with the knife still in the air, when the words began to come out like stones. "Velma will take care of all the children during the party," Cassidy said, in that sweet voice she used even to give orders. Hannah laughed. "Oh, perfect. There are already 15 children confirmed, right? It's like hiring a professional nanny without paying a dime." They both laughed. "And the best thing," Cassidy continued, "is that she won't even realize she's being used. You'll think you're helping as always." Hannah completed with the sentence that went through my chest like a blade. "Old lady, there's nothing else to do anyway. I'm glad she's going to feel important." At that moment, I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt a kind of cold, an emptiness in my stomach, as if my body had understood before my heart what that meant. I was no longer the mother who helps out of love. I was their logistics plan, the cheap arm, the solution that no one valued, but everyone used. Like an old piece of furniture in the house, too ugly to be in the living room, but too useful to throw away. They continued talking about the details of the wedding, the decoration, the flowers. They said that I would probably stay in the children's room with the toys and backpacks of the little ones, that it didn't make sense to reserve a place for me at the main table. After all, she'll be busy with the kids, she won't even eat properly. I was standing there, with the knife in my hand, and my eyes fixed on a piece of carrot that no longer meant anything. The sound of the board on the bench had disappeared. So did the radio. Just the buzzing of blood in my ears, and those words stuck like thorns in my chest. I cut again, mechanically, just so my fingers wouldn't shake. But inside me, something was already changing. I have always been a practical, silent, but attentive woman. And that day, behind that hand-embroidered lace curtain, I learned more about those two than in all the years of living together. Cassidy, the girl who called me second mom last Christmas, now spoke of me as if I were a favor that is asked of the wind. And Hannah, who barely knew me, already felt entitled to laugh at my age, of my time, of my life. I could have gone there. He could have opened the door, knocked on the table and said everything that was stuck. But that's not how I was raised. And that's not how I was going to react. Instead, I washed my hands, took off my apron, turned off the fire. I went to the room and closed the door calmly. I sat in the blue armchair that was next to the window and looked at the backyard. I could only see their shadows moving and the gestures of their hands pointing and laughing, as if I didn't exist, as if I were already on the other side. There, alone in my corner, something broke inside me. It was not a scandal. It was silence. a silence that spoke more than any scream, because when we realize that we are not seen as a mother, but as a service, love becomes memory, and memory becomes a wall, cold, rigid, insurmountable. I stayed in that chair for more than an hour, going over my every gesture from the last few months, the hours in the kitchen, the purchases with my own money, the handmade seams for the party napkins, the guest list that I typed myself with difficulty because I couldn't see the keys properly. I had put my heart into every detail, and now I realized that my heart had become useful, and usefulness, but I didn't cry. Not that day. I just got up, opened my closet, and started folding the clothes. A small suitcase on wheels was still stored from the last outing I took with my friend Loretta. As I touched her, I felt something strange. A thought. A whisper from God, perhaps. What if I didn't show up at the wedding? And that's how the first spark came about. Discreet, but alive. Because when a woman like me is wounded in silence, it does not attack. She prepares. But do you think it was easy to make this decision? Do you think I slept peacefully that night? Well, I'll tell you something. It wasn't even close. And what happened in the following days? You won't believe it. That night, I went to bed early, but sleep did not come. The pillow was soft, the room dark as always, but inside me there was a light on that wouldn't go out. A nuisance, a vigil. It was as if my body was asleep, but my soul was standing, looking at everything I had built, and everything they were trying to dismantle. I got up in the middle of the night, went to the hallway, turned on the dim light in the room, and stared at the wall where the memories of my life are. There is Daniel's diploma, hung with a dark wooden frame. I was the one who paid for his graduation ceremony, you know? He wanted to give up to save money. I said, "No, you're going to wear that gown and walk on that stage. I fought too hard not to see you live this." On the side, a photo of our last Christmas together, and below it, another frame, smaller, where I keep the handwritten vow of my marriage to Frank. His shaky lyrics read, "I promise to be by your side until God takes me or you decide to walk without me." The ring is still on my finger. I never took it off. Not even when life got hard. Not even when loneliness tightened. Not even when my son started to treat me as an extension of the furniture in the house. I went back to the room, sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I wasn't going to make a shack. It wasn't in my nature. And even if I wanted to, who would listen to me? By this time, I knew that any word of mine would be treated as exaggeration, like sensible old age. So no, I didn't say anything. I just started to think. And thinking calmly is what makes a wounded woman find her strength. The next day, Daniel called me. I answered with the usual sweet voice. "Hi, my son." He asked how the preparations were going. He thanked me once again for taking care of everything. He said he was busy at work, but that he and Cassidy were trusting me. That hurt. Trusting. The word weighed in the air. Those who trust do not plan behind their backs. But I responded with the same meekness as always. "Everything is going well, dear. Everything will be fine." When I hung up, my hand was stuck on the phone for a few seconds. It was at that exact moment that I decided that I would no longer appear at the wedding. It was not just a choice. It was a right not to be used, of no longer accepting to carry the piano while others dance. I spent the afternoon cleaning the house as if cleaning his own heart. I took off my apron from the kitchen and folded it carefully, as if I were ending a cycle. I kept the embroidered napkins I had made for the party tables. It had taken days, and each stitch had been made with care. But now I saw, affection without respect becomes a doormat, and I wasn't made for that. I went to the porch, sat in the rocking chair, and looked at the garden. The hydrangeas were in bloom. The smell of rosemary mixed with the warm afternoon air. It was as if nature was telling me, "You're still whole. It still has life. You can still choose." I called my friend Loretta at the end of the day. Her voice, firm and sweet, was a hug that came over the phone. I told what I had heard, word for word. She was silent for a while and then said, "Velma, you have spent your life serving. Maybe the time has come to be served." And I replied, "I don't want to be served, Loretta. I just want them to see me." That night, I slept better. The first night in which the idea of disappearing from the wedding ceased to be an impulse and became a plan. But do you think it was easy? That I wasn't afraid to look cruel? To disappoint my own son? Well, that's exactly what kept me up at night the next morning. What if he never forgave me? What if I regretted it? But then, something happened. Something that made it impossible to turn back. Something that showed me that I wasn't just forgotten. I was discarded. And when a woman realizes that, my dear, then the game changes. And you will understand why. The next day, with the sun already high and the kettle beeping in the kitchen, I called Loretta. Loretta has been my friend since our children still ran around the yard looking for fireflies. Retired teacher, firm head, sharp heart. If there's one person in the world who really knows me, it's them. When he answered, I didn't even have to pretend to be strong. I spoke in a clean voice, without flourish. Loretta, I heard everything. A Cassidy, her sister, calling me a free babysitter for 15 children. On the other end of the line, silence. And then, just a sad sigh. Oh, Velma. But I wasn't caring to cry. Not that day. I had already cried everything I needed inside my chest. What I wanted now was to act. Loretta, I'm thinking about not going to the wedding. To disappear in the day. To let them discover for themselves what it is to plan something without consulting the hearts of others. And then, for the first time in my life, I heard my friend laugh. It was not mockery. It was admiration. Velma Reynolds, you are stronger than you think. That's when the idea came up. Instead of being locked up at home, suffering, I could go with her to the spa in Asheville. A couple of days of rest, away from everything. Foot massage, heated pool, lavender tea. Loretta got excited. There's that hotel high up on Blue Ridge Mountain, with a view of the trees. Let's go there. And you know what's better? We are not going to say anything. Anyone who doesn't care about our value doesn't deserve explanation. I hung up the phone with my heart racing. It was the first time in a long time that I had made a plan thinking only of myself, only in me. Can you imagine what that is? After a lifetime of thinking about others first? I started to take action on the same day. I took my notebook, where I write everything down, and I canceled, one by one, the commitments I made. I called the boy from the flower shop. Mr. Marvin, I'm going to need to cancel the arrangements for Saturday. Change of plans, yes. He tried to insist, but I was firm. Then I called the lady of sweets. Mrs. Patrice, you can hold that order. The party will change. Each call was like a small release. It was as if I was lifting invisible weights off my shoulders. Weights I didn't even know I was carrying. I canceled the tablecloths, the molds, the sound service. I left no trace. No scandal, no fight. Just a surgical silence. And at no time did Daniel call. No questions, no checks. Maybe he trusted too much. Or maybe cared less. And it was at this pace that the days passed. I would get up early, make my coffee, watch the wedding preparations empty without anyone noticing. It was like disassembling a bomb with your bare hands. Each strand pulled was a scratch, but also a relief. Deep down, I knew that chaos was planted, and that would flourish at the right time. Now let me ask you a little something. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story with every detail, every truth that for years was hidden in silence. If you are listening to it with affection, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel, because I still have a lot to tell you. And sometimes, just knowing that someone is listening gives you the courage to follow. But you want to know what made me more sure that I was right to do all that? It was a conversation. One last conversation. Something Daniel told me 2 days before the wedding, and that showed that he had no idea who I really was, and what I was capable of doing. You will understand. And maybe you'll be surprised too. I woke up before the sun rose. The sky was still dark blue, as if the world was holding its breath. The house was silent, and this time, the silence was mine. I went to the bathroom, took a long, warm shower with my favorite lavender soap. Each movement was a farewell to a cycle. The apron hanging on the wall, the worn slipper on the bedroom door, the recipe book on the table. I put on my clothes calmly, folded the knitted blanket I was going to take with me, and before closing the small suitcase with wheels, I took a deep breath. It was little that I took, but for the first time, everything I carried was mine alone. I wrote the letter sitting at the living room table, with the same blue pen with which I have written so many notes of affection, so many shopping lists, so many messages of affection. But this time, the words were different. Daniel, Cassidy, you had a plan. So do I. I placed the note in the center of the table, next to a family photo, those old ones, smiling on an old Christmas, when love still seemed true. I took the keys, carefully locked the door, and went down the 2 steps of the balcony, as if I were stepping on another time. At the gate, Loretta was already waiting for me in the car with a serene smile and 2 bottles of water. "Ready?" she asked. "Very ready," I replied. The road to Asheville was smooth. The trees seemed to dance on the sides of the road, as if they were happy with my decision. It was as if everything in the way was telling me, "You did it right." When we arrived at the spa, we were greeted with iced tea and scented towels. The receptionist called us ladies and treated us like queens. That, for me, was already reparation. In place of the kitchen full of platters, there was a whirlpool tub, lavender and eucalyptus essential oils, a fuzzy white robe that seemed to hug me back. I lay down on a lounger and closed my eyes. For the first time in many years, my body didn't hurt. Meanwhile, in Charleston, the hours passed quickly, but not for those who expected. The phone began to vibrate in the morning. First a call from Daniel, then another, then messages, then missed calls. I didn't answer any. The phone was silent, stored inside the bag, and the bag was stored inside the closet. At that time, the sound I wanted to hear was that of the waters running in the fountain in the garden, the sound of me coming back to me. I don't know exactly at what point the chaos started there, but I imagine the sequence. I imagine Daniel going to my house and finding the door closed, the card on the table. I imagine Cassidy with impeccable hair, opening his phone and reading the automatic message. "This number is not available at the moment." I imagine the children running from one side to the other, without a babysitter, without control, without plan B. I imagine the buffet that never arrived, the sweets that didn't exist, the flowers that didn't appear. I imagine the stares of the hungry, impatient guests, sweating in the South Carolina heat. And in the middle of it all, I imagine emptiness, the space I left. Because sometimes, our absence teaches more than years of presence. In the late afternoon, Loretta and I were sitting on the balcony of our room, overlooking the mountains, the sky tinged with orange and purple, the hot tea in his hands. She looked at me with that look of someone who knows things. "Velma, you're gone, and sometimes disappearing is the most elegant way to appear." I smiled, and there, in that silence between 2 friends, something settled inside me. It was not revenge. It was justice. It wasn't anger. It was dignity. But what I didn't know, it's just that the silence also starts screaming after a while. And at that very moment, when I sighed in peace, someone on the other side of the chaos would take the car and come to meet me. What would he say when he saw me? And did I still have something to listen to? I had my eyes closed, feeling the heat of the chocolate slowly running down my back. It was such a sweet feeling, so enveloping, that for a moment, I forgot about the world outside. The massage therapist had light, silent hands. The ambient music was a distant violin, as if someone were playing outside an old window. The aroma of vanilla oil mingled with the sound of running water, and for the first time in a long time, my whole body felt welcomed. It was as if all parts of me, the woman, the mother, the widow, the forgotten one, had received a hug at the same time. The phone began to vibrate in the closet. Once, 2, 3, insistent as someone who has never heard no in his life. Loretta, who was in a white bathrobe next to me, only raised her eyebrow. "I think the hurricane has arrived," she said. Smile. I waited a little longer. On the 4th call, I got off the stretcher calmly, put on my bathrobe, dried my hands, and took the device. It was Daniel, his name flashing on the screen like a memory. I let it play 3 more times. And I did. On the other side, the voice I'd known since he was a boy, but now mixed with a despair I'd never heard. "Mom, where are you? What happened? We are here. Everything went wrong. The buffet didn't come. The sweets disappeared. The children were running like crazy. Cassidy has been crying in the bathroom for an hour." I listened to everything in silence. Behind his voice, the noise of people talking loudly, glasses falling, a child crying. It was as if I was hearing the consequence of their every choice. "Lev, Daniel," I said in a firm but sweet voice. "I told you so." But no one wanted to listen. He stuttered. "But Mom, we thought that you were with us in this, that it would help." I sighed deeply. You didn't want my help, son. You wanted my service. He tried to change his tone. Forgive me. We made a mistake. But if you still want to come, we pay. It pays well. I cover everything. Just come. That's when I smiled. Not a mocking smile. It was a sad but firm smile. A smile from someone who finally understood his value. A nanny, Daniel, pays for itself. A mother respects himself. On the other side, silence. Afterward, Cassidy joined the call, crying, her voice breaking. Velma, please, I'm begging. I can't handle all of this without you. I know we talked nonsense. I know. I was nervous. But forgive me. Please. Cassidy, who once called me second mother, now called me almost a saint. I heard, in silence. Then I said, Cassidy, what are you feeling right now? That's exactly what I felt that day, there in the kitchen. But I listened quietly. And you're screaming. She began to sob. But I didn't say anything else. I just turned it off. I closed the cell phone with the palm of my hand, as if closing an old book. I went back to the stretcher. I lay down. Loretta looked at me as if holding an invisible toast. Do you want me to order more chocolate? Smile. I want to. 2 layers. Because you know. It's funny how the absence of an old woman can make more noise than the presence of 200 people. They planned every minute of that wedding, except what they would do without me. And if you're here listening to this story, stay until the end, because the most remarkable moment is yet to come. I swear to you, there was a moment, days later, that even I didn't imagine that I could still get emotional like that. But first, there was a visit, and when he showed up at my door, with his eyes downcast and a piece of paper in his hand, I knew the game wasn't over yet. And you'll see why. They say that certain truths, when suppressed for too long, come back with more force. And that day, as I leaned back on a chaise lounge with a warm towel over my eyes, my truth began to circulate between the wedding tables like wind before the storm. Daniel, in a mixture of despair and wounded pride, began to call everything related to him, asking for help, trying to understand how to control the chaos. But what he didn't know, it's just that the story was already escaping through the cracks, like smoke from a burnt pot. The first to comment was his own sister-in-law, Rachel, his cousin's wife, who had overheard the conversation in the bathroom while Cassidy was crying with her sister. She said out loud that she thought it was absurd to put the groom's mother to take care of 15 children as if she were an employee. Then came Aunt Margaret, from the interior of Georgia, who spoke loudly, as if not mincing words. Velma spent her life serving this family, and that's how they say thank you. The pastor of the church, who was there to bless the ceremony, heard the whispers and preferred to remain silent. But his look at Daniel, before going up to the improvised altar, said it all. By this time, half of the guests already knew that I was not there by choice, that I was gone, that I wasn't invited to celebrate, but scaled to work, and that, in the end, I decided not to be used. The children's mothers began to complain. One of them, the lady named Glenda, said loud and clear, "My son fell and hit his chin. Where's the adult responsible for this bunch of loose children?" And then there was no turning back. The aunts started to leave. Some discreet, others not so much. One of them, Donna Iraine, a family friend for more than 40 years, passed Daniel and said, "Velma wouldn't do that out of harm. If she didn't come, it's because you deserved it." Cassidy tried to keep his composure, but couldn't. She went back to the bathroom and was locked there for almost 40 minutes. The makeup is runny, the dress stained with wine. Her sister tried to hush up the case, but the more she tried, the more it spread, because there are things that we don't hold, and the absence of a mother, when it is real, it weighs more than any decoration hanging from the ceiling. Daniel, for the first time in his life, was paralyzed. They say he stood on the corner of the track, staring at the empty chairs, not knowing what to do. That he held his cell phone in his hand as if he was still waiting for me to call. But I didn't care, and I wasn't going to care. You know, there's a pain that only a mother understands. It's not the pain of being forgotten, because we've already learned to swallow that. It is the pain of being treated as an accessory, as a support piece, as something that is always there, but that no one asks if they want to be. And when we disappear, when we finally disappear, then everyone notices. But by then, it's too late. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that they only value your presence when you threaten to leave? Have you noticed that there are people who only recognize their value when their seat is empty? If you've been through this, comment below with a short sentence. It can be, "I understand you. I know how it is. It's true." Because look, that kind of silence hurts more than any scream. And when he finally becomes an absence, the whole world turning around still doesn't solve it. And yet, on that day, I still didn't know everything. Because sometimes, what starts as gossip turns into an avalanche, and what no one expected was that such a simple absence were to awaken something much greater, something that would escape the control of the bride herself, and that would end up revealing a truth like me. I was prepared to face it. The table was set simply, but everything there seemed more beautiful than any wedding banquet. It was just a plate of fresh pasta, made by careful hands in the spa itself, a glass of very cold white wine, and the good silence of true friendship. Loretta and I were sitting outside on a wooden deck, watching the sun set behind the mountains, the sky tinged with gold and lilac, as if God had taken care of the painting that day just to say to me, "You did it right, my daughter." With each bite, a memory came back, not as pain, but as a page turned. "Loretta," I said, laughing softly, "it's the first time in decades that I've sat down to eat without thinking about whether someone needs more napkins, whether the food is hot enough, or whether a child is going to stumble running near the table." She laughed too. "You were always the last to sit down, and the first to get up." I took a sip of the wine. The coolness descended softly, like a hug. Today no one called me a helpful old woman. Nobody asked me to take a look at the children. No one pushed me into the kitchen with a fake smile. And yet, I felt alive, because that was it. Life. Mine. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. No duty, no guilt, no fatigue disguised as gratitude. The cell phone vibrated for the third time. It was on the table, face down. I knew who it was. Probably more requests, more apologies, more attempts to make it seem that the mistake was small. But I didn't touch it. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but for peace. Because sometimes, hearing one more justification only delays healing. And that night was my healing. The moon appeared shy behind the trees, and the wind brought the smell of pine mixed with flowers. Loretta looked at me fondly. "Did you realize what happened, Velma? You came to yourself." Sometimes we spend our lives being so many things to others that we forget to be people for ourselves. Those words kept swirling inside me, because they were true. I had been so many things: wife, mother, mother-in-law, cook, seamstress, listener, support. But that night, I was just Velma, the woman who liked to embroider in the afternoon, cornbread and butter, old songs, and silence. That's it. It was more than enough. I felt my body rest in a different way. It wasn't just physical. It was as if the soul had finally gone to bed too. The weight I had carried for years, of anticipation, sacrifice without recognition, constant and invisible presence, all of that seemed to have evaporated with the sunset. And that's when I understood. Sometimes it's not the scandal that solves it. It is the retreat. It's the space we leave for the other to feel. And Daniel was feeling it. I knew it. And he was going to feel it even more. But even in that peace, even with a light heart, I still didn't imagine what he would do next. Because some absences change the course of history. And when a child realizes, too late, the value of a mother, he can make decisions that we never expect. And that's exactly what happened. I woke up to the soft morning light streaming in through the white linen curtains. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own thoughts. No screaming children. No pan on the fire. No, Mom. Can you do this quickly? For the first time in so many years, I woke up without being called up for anything. I woke up just for me. I sat on the edge of the bed, stretched my legs calmly, and thanked in silence. My body, tired from a lifetime of serving, now rested in its own time. Loretta was already on the porch, in a bathrobe, with a cup of tea, and that calm look of someone who knows the value of what she is experiencing. I sat next to her, and together, we stood there looking at the horizon. The sky was a clear blue, as if even he had been washed the night before. "I slept like an angel," I said, and she, smiling, "You woke up like a queen," laughed. We went to have breakfast in the main spa hall, that kind of place with cut fruits like flowers, artisanal jams and still warm breads. I helped myself calmly, as if discovering the pleasure of existing. As the butter melted over the slice of bread, I looked around. No one expected anything from me. Nobody called me. Nobody pointed out. It was just me, my friend, and all the time in the world. It was then that a television turned on in a corner of the room caught my attention. The volume was low, but the images said it all. The reporter, with the microphone in hand, described a chaotic wedding that had taken place in the city center the day before. The party, which was going to be an elegant event, ended in widespread confusion. According to reports, there was no buffet. Children ran wildly among the guests, and the bride spent part of the reception locked in the bathroom. The background image was of a decorated hall, but with chairs out of place and glasses thrown to the floor. The legend? Marriage becomes a police case. Absence of staff causes turmoil. Loretta raised an eyebrow in astonishment. Velma, I just drank my tea slowly. Yes, Loretta. It seems that the silence has become news. The reporter continued. According to sources close to the family, the person responsible for the buffet would have given up at the last minute. There are also comments about an unexpected absence that compromised the care of the children at the site. And then, as if trying not to overexpose, she said, the groom's last name, Daniel Reynolds, was confirmed by guests present. I didn't need to listen anymore. That was not my revenge. I never planned to embarrass anyone. But as my grandmother says, and as Loretta repeated right there, what we don't say, God cries out. And he screamed. What I tried to solve with silence, the universe tried to open wide with noise. It was as if, for once, the world was on my side. Not to take revenge, but to validate myself. And that's when I realized that my absence was not just absence. It was an answer. You know, sometimes we think we're only seen when we speak, but there is silence that weighs more than an entire sermon. And at that breakfast, between one bite and another, between a sip of tea and a newspaper sentence, I was sure I had done the right thing. And if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes all we need is someone who says, you did well to choose yourself. But what I didn't know yet was that Daniel had also seen the report, and that, even after everything, he wasn't going to let it end like that, because what happened the next day, it was unlike anything I could have expected. You'll see. The night came serene on Sunday, and for the first time in a long time, I was on the porch of my house without a tea towel on my shoulder or a stained apron on my lap. I was only wearing a light coat, a warm tea, and the sound of crickets cutting through the silence that I myself created. When the headlights of the car illuminated the entrance of the house, my heart took that old leap, the one that only a mother knows. It was Daniel. He parked slowly, stayed in the car for a while, head down, hands on the wheel. Then he went out, walked to the porch like a boy who knows he's messed up, but doesn't know how to clean it. He didn't knock on the door. He left a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavenders, clumsy green branches, and an envelope folded in half, with my name written by hand. I stayed inside, in the dark of the room, seeing through the crack in the curtain. I didn't open the door. I waited for him to get back in the car and leave. I waited for the silence to return, as if he also needed time to settle on my chest. I took the letter calmly. His hands did not tremble. I read sitting in the armchair that belonged to my husband. His handwriting was still the same as the school notes, the Mother's Day cards, the messages on the fridge. But the content weighed heavily. Mom, I'm sorry. I thought you would understand. You have always helped so much. I thought I wouldn't mind helping again. We were overloaded, and everything went fast. I should have asked you. I should have respected it more. There were more words, some phrases of endearment, some of guilt. But what stuck me was this. I thought I wouldn't mind, as if a mother's love were an eternal obligation, as if the absence of protest were consent. I didn't cry. I just took a deep breath, because it hurt, but it didn't hurt anymore. It was like putting your hand on an old scar. You feel it, but you know it's already closing. I folded the paper gently, kept it in the drawer along with the other memories that are not thrown away, but also do not hang on the wall. Cassidy later emailed her a more polished text, full of "Dear Velma, we recognize the mistake. We would love to talk in person." She said she was hurt, ashamed, that her family was also shaken. But reading line by line, what I saw there was no regret. It was desperation, despair of those who were exposed, not those who understood. And then a phrase came to me that kept echoing inside me: regret that is born only after the consequence. It is not yet repentance. It's fear. That night, I sat back on the porch, covered with the blanket my mother knitted when I was a little girl. I looked at the sky, full of stars, and thought about all the times I kept silent, forgave, helped without being seen. And for the first time, I felt that all of this brought me here, where silence was no longer submission. It was a choice. And if you are here with me so far, listening to this story, I ask you, continue, because the most unexpected moment was yet to come. A decision he would make, and that would change everything. You'll see. The sun was already lower, gilding the leaves in my garden, as if each one of them held an ancient secret. I sat on the wooden bench that Frank built with his own hands, the one that creaks a little when you settle down, as if complaining about the weather, but holding on, as it did. On her lap, the picture frame that is on the living room shelf. The frame was a little worn, but the photo of him smiling still carried that same sweet and decisive look. "Frank," I whispered, "would you have been as disappointed as I was?" I stood there looking at his image, waiting for the breeze to bring some answer, and it was as if I heard his voice, right in that calm way that only he had. "You taught our son to conquer everything. Now you are teaching him not to forget where he came from." That crossed me, because it's true. We love our children so much that we want to give the world, but sometimes, in the midst of so much supply, they forget the value of roots, and those who don't remember where they came from start treating those who stayed behind as furniture, and not a mother. I remembered the nights when Frank and I would stay awake waiting for Daniel to come back from college parties. We sat on the couch, shared a weak coffee, and dreamed big. This boy will go far, Velma, but we need to make sure that he takes his heart with him. We took turns saving, making the house bills, the small joys of everyday life. He sold tools, I cleaned houses. There were days when we only had rice and egg for lunch, but Daniel never knew that. We made it seem that the world was light, even carrying weight on our backs. And now, sitting there, I thought, did we protect too much? Could it be that, by hiding the sacrifices, he learned to receive, but not to repay? I felt my eyes fill, but I didn't let any tears fall, because the pain of that day was not one of regret. It was lucid, a clean pain, which only comes when we understand the reason for everything. And at that moment, looking at Frank's portrait, I understood. My absence was not revenge. It was love. It was a correction. It was a silent gesture of those who still believe that it is possible to teach, even after a wound. You know, there are memories that are kept in such a deep corner of us that they only come to the surface when silence calls. And when they come, it seems that time doubles. We come back, feel it, relive it, as if everything was still there. The voice, the smell, the advice. Do you have any memories like that? Any moment that stayed with you forever? If so, tell me in the comments. Sometimes opening the chest of memory is a beautiful way to remember who we are. I stayed there on the bench until the sky began to darken. Night was approaching, and, with it, a strange intuition. Because deep in my chest, something told me that that conversation with Frank would not be the last revelation of the day. Something was about to happen, something that was coming towards my door, and it was not a letter nor a message. It was flesh, blood, and repentance. And when I opened it, it was like opening up the past again. You will understand. I tapped the cornbread on the tea towel carefully, as I had done every Saturday morning since I learned from my mother. The smell spread through the house like a hug, and I always told myself that as long as the bread still rose in the oven, there was hope. That's when I heard the knock on the door. 3 dry, short touches, as if whoever was on the other side didn't know if they really wanted to be served. I looked out the side window, and there he was, Daniel, standing, with his hair messy, his shirt rumpled, and his eyes, the red eyes of someone who hadn't slept for days. For a moment I hesitated. My hand landed on the doorknob, but I didn't turn. I stood there watching, It was my boy, but not the same as before. The arrogance had trickled down the corners of his eyes, and in its place, there was a weight, one of those that life puts on when the lesson comes late. I opened the door slowly. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me as if he was asking permission to even breathe. "Mom, please, can I come in?" The voice came out trembling, almost a whisper. I made room without a word, and he entered. He stopped in the middle of the room and collapsed. Literally. He knelt on the carpet as if asking for forgiveness on an altar. He started crying in a way I hadn't seen since school, when he fell off his bike and broke his arm. But now it wasn't physical pain. It was another type of fracture. I sat in the armchair and waited. His crying filled the room like a dammed river that finally finds the crack to gush. And when his voice returned, it was cut off by sobs. The marriage was a disaster. Cassidy. She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. He said that the humiliation was too great, that I should have protected you, not used you. He continued. The guests complained. Some left. One of the mothers, Glenda, threatened to sue us. She said that her son was injured because he did not have adequate supervision. Mother, I didn't think about it. I swear by all that is sacred, I didn't think about what it meant to you. I thought that as always, you would be able to handle it, that you'd be there, because you always have been. I was silent. I let him say everything. That would remove from within that guilt that, now, seemed real. He sat on the couch, head bowed, hands clasped between his knees, as if he were being judged. And in a way, he was. I swear to you, Mom, when I saw you not there, it was as if a part of me fell into a hole. The silence you left at that party screamed louder than any music. And I finally understood. I understood everything you endured for years, everything you never said. You endured it all in silence. And now, for the first time, I heard it. I took a deep breath. What to say to a child who arrives so late with the truth, who finally understands, but only after the world falls apart? Daniel, I said, my voice steady, when we love, we endure. But holding on does not mean accepting being diminished. And mother's love, my son, it is not a license for abuse. It's root, but even roots get tired of sustaining trees that only grow upwards and forget to look down. He cried again, lower, more restrained, like who knows that maybe it's too late. And maybe it was. You know, there are certain tears that we never expect to see. When he was little, I dreamed of the day when he would cry with emotion when he saw me sitting in the front row of some achievement. I never imagined that one day I would cry because I realized that his mother, tired. And it was this crying that broke me and healed me at the same time. But something told me that that visit was not yet everything. That repentance, no matter how sincere it was still going to turn into something bigger, something he himself did not imagine. Because sometimes, when pain sets in, it becomes a seed of change. And the change, I didn't see this one coming. But it came, and she didn't come alone. You will understand what happened, and why. The phone rang in the late afternoon, just as I was watering the hydrangeas in the front yard. I knew the number. It was her. The voice came low, choked. Velma, I'd like to talk to you. Personally. Only if you allow it. It took me a few seconds before answering. Not because I was undecided, but because I knew that moment needed the exact measure. Come on, Cassidy. But come alone. And come with truth. She arrived half an hour later. No makeup, no heels, no perfume. He carried on his face the weight of someone who cried more than slept. And for the first time, she didn't try to smile when she saw me. He just lowered his head, holding back his tears as if holding his breath. I opened the door and made a gesture with my hand, inviting her to come in. We sat in the living room, each at one end of the sofa, as if the space between us was the exact size of the wound that still hurt. It took a long time to start. The words came as if they had to cross a thick wall from the inside. I grew up without a mother, Velma, without anyone to teach me how to be a daughter. My house was noise, demand, competition. When I met you, you offered me peace, but I didn't know what to do with it. It was like receiving a gift that we think we don't deserve. Her voice failed, but she didn't stop. You taught me how to make peach cobbler, gave me handmade scarf, took care of my niece when my sister couldn't. And even so, I looked at you suspiciously. I felt like if I let you in too much, I would become small next to you. So I started to do the opposite, diminish you, to fit you into a role of helper, of nanny, of relief, because it was easier to put you below than to recognize that you were always above. She finally cried. Not because of shame of what he said, but because of the courage to say it. And it was there, at that moment, that I understood. Real regret does not come with makeup. Comes with wet face and open heart. I listened to her entirely. No cutting. Without censorship. Because sometimes, silence is also a gift. That of letting the other see themselves in their own speech. When she finished, she lowered her eyes and waited, as if he knew that any answer would be better than the echo of his own guilt. "Cassidy," I said with serene firmness, "your words are not light, nor easy, but they are yours. And that's why I listened." I paused. "I can accept what you brought here today. I can recognize your courage, but my confidence, this one you will need to rebuild, with time, with gesture, with true presence." She nodded, wiping her face. He did not ask for forgiveness again. He did not try to justify anything else. She just stood there, quietly, as if finally understanding that some bridges are not rebuilt in a hurry. And as she said goodbye, something in the way she looked at me told me that this conversation wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because there is reconciliation that begins on the ground, with the humility of those who kneel, not to beg, but to recognize where they have gone wrong. And that's where the story turns, because what she did next, I confess, not even in my most hopeful thoughts would I have imagined. You need to see what happened. You will understand what repentance is in action. They were silent weeks, but not empty. It was as if the house, once full of requests and invisible tasks, now breathed with me in the same rhythm. For the first time in many years, I felt that my name was no longer synonymous with available. It was Velma. Only Velma. That's it. That was all. Daniel started to pass by here more often, but unlike before, he didn't come to get something. He came to bring it. An apple cake he tried to make himself. It was a little raw in the middle, but I ate it smiling. An old book that he found in a used bookstore and said it had my face. Simple little things, but they said, "I'm paying attention." Cassidy, for his part, sent messages before any visit. I always asked if I could come. When she came, she brought what she knew I liked. Flowers from the field, organic teas, and from time to time, a cornmeal cake made by her. But what touched me most were not the material gestures. It was the new care in their voices, the way they talked to me, with pause, with listening, with eyes that finally saw. One night they invited me to their house for dinner. I accepted, on the condition that I didn't have to take anything. Cassidy laughed and said, "You are the gift." It was just dinner, but inside me it felt like the reconstruction of a temple. The table was set with affection. Candles, cloth napkins, matching plates. She surpassed herself. During dinner, we talked amenities. Daniel spoke about the company. Cassidy told of a community garden he began to frequent. Until, between one bite and another, she looked at me differently. A look that was not one of request, nor of obligation. It was a thirsty look. "Velma," she said, "I wanted to hear from you more. Tell me your story, really. I want to meet the woman who created all this that we have." For a moment, words failed me, because all my life, people came to me for what I could offer. No one stopped to ask where I came from, what wounds I carried, what dreams did I leave along the way so that others would have theirs. And that's when I thought, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If this story that I'm sharing with you can serve as a mirror or consolation for someone, like this video, subscribe. Let's make it reach those who have also felt invisible inside their own home. I turned my eyes to Cassidy and smiled. "Do you have time?" I asked. She nodded willingly, and then I started talking. From my 20 years cleaning houses in Savannah. From Frank, who wrote me love notes in the lunchbox. The day Daniel was born, and I cried so much with joy that the nurse thought it was pain. I told him about the nights I slept standing up waiting for him to come back from college, the mornings I fried pancakes with a heavy heart, just to keep the house light even when my pocket was empty. They listened to me with respect, without interrupting, without looking at the cell phone. Daniel even cried in silence in some parts. And when I finished, there was no clapping, no ready-made phrases, just a silence full of presence. Of those who say, "Now we see you." That night became a milestone, not only in the relationship with them, but within me, because I understood that sometimes what we need is not noisy justice. It is one of intimate reparation, the one that arrives slowly, but takes root. But do you know what was most unexpected? That's what Cassidy asked me a few days later. A gesture, a symbol, an invitation that I never imagined hearing from that mouth. And when she said, I knew that everything was really changing. Want to know what it was? So follow me. You will understand why it took me so long to answer, and why this time the choice was mine. I began writing my book sitting at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in through the glass windows, reflecting off the hanging pots. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the aroma of the spices I kept in glass jars, each with its own story. It was as if each ingredient had a memory stored, a piece of my life that I was about to record. Daniel sat next to me, keyboard open, ready to help me with the technical part, while Cassidy spread ideas for dissemination, social networks, and even contacts of local publishers. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't just writing recipes. I was telling my story, my legacy, everything I had built, not just as a mother or mother-in-law, but as a woman who learned to assert herself with elegance. As I typed the first pecan pie recipe, my mind traveled through the decades. I remembered all the mornings I woke up before everyone else to prepare breakfast for Daniel, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the birthdays I organized alone, the loneliness after Frank was gone. Each moment of sacrifice now had a new meaning. And at that moment, as I reviewed my own words, I felt a warmth in my chest, not of sadness, but of accomplishment. Everything I've been through has brought me here, and now, for the first time in a long time, I was writing to myself. Cassidy next to me looked on in awe. Velma, you have to record these stories, not only the recipes, but what each dish represents. What you did for Daniel, for me, for the family. It's unique. I smiled, my fingers stopping on the keyboard. That's right, honey. It's not just about cooking. It's about serving with dignity, about teaching respect and love without ever losing your identity. And as I spoke, I felt a mixture of nostalgia and hope, because every line I wrote seemed to free me from years of external expectations. Daniel interrupted with a practical suggestion. Mom, let's create chapters that combine recipes and stories. Like, you tell the story of a party you organized, and then put the recipe that marked that moment. I loved the idea. Each chapter would be a piece of my life, a memory intertwined with flavors that everyone could feel, even without being in the kitchen. And so, between laughter and memories, I began to shape what would be my legacy. While writing about Christmas in Savannah, when the fine snow covered the streets, and Daniel was just a boy running between presents, I realized something powerful. I was turning pain and silence into something positive. Every memory that once hurt, every ignored gesture, every moment I felt like my presence was underestimated, now had value. And that value was being immortalized, not in photos or at parties, but in words that would tell my truth. In the middle of writing, Cassidy commented, Velma, you know, a lot of people are going to identify with you, women who gave everything and were forgotten. You are creating a mirror for them, showing that it is possible to be strong, to be respected, and still be loved. And at that time, I felt that every hour spent bending over backwards to satisfy other people's expectations was not in vain. All that now had a greater purpose. And I, who spent decades feeling like the helpful old woman, finally realized that I could be remembered in another way, as a woman who teaches, who guides, who shows by example. While I was writing the introduction to the book, a phrase came to my mind and kept repeating in my heart. It's not about serving to be remembered. It's about teaching, so that memory is dignified. I sighed deeply and smiled, because for the first time, I was creating something that would last beyond my physical presence, something that would speak of quiet courage, patience, and love that doesn't require immediate recognition. And it was in this calm, between one recipe and another, that I realized that the life I built for others finally had a space for me. I could choose when to be useful, when to share my wisdom, when to withdraw to myself. It was a freedom that can only be learned with the years. And now, with each word typed, I felt my heart lighter, happier. While Cassidy organized some promotional ideas and Daniel checked formatting details, I stared at the kitchen, the pots, the spice jars, the old wooden table that witnessed years of love and dedication, and I thought, Velma, you have not been forgotten. You were prepared for this moment of recognition, for this time to respect yourself, to be seen not for what you do for others, but for what you are as a whole. And as the sun went down and the afternoon heat gave way to a cool breeze, I felt that something bigger was about to happen. A gesture, a surprise, something that would make this whole story complete in a way that I could not yet imagine. But I knew, deep down, that the time was coming to see the real impact of what I finally decided, to write my story, to take my place, and to show the world that respect and dignity have no age. And that's exactly what you need to wait for the next part. Because what happened next, involving Daniel, Cassidy, and my own decision to publish this book, changed everything unexpectedly. And you'll want to see how that legacy has revealed itself in surprising ways. The launch of my book at the Charleston Community Library was like a party I never imagined living. The soft lights reflected off the wooden shelves, and the smell of new books mingled with the scent of the flowers they had placed on the autograph table. I was sitting there, with Cassidy next to me, holding my hands as if to convey silent pride, and Daniel standing next to me, with that smile that always made me feel that every sacrifice was worth it. People started approaching, familiar neighbors, local church members, parents who had children in my old community cooking classes. Some even hugged me, others shook my hand firmly, and in each gesture I felt a recognition that went far beyond words. During the event, the local mayor made a point of saying a few words, mentioning my name and my story, without going into sensational details. She spoke about dignity, respect for the elderly, and how our silent choices can inspire an entire community. It was then that I realized that the story of my absence from Daniel's wedding had been leaked anonymously, going viral on online forums as a symbol of courage and respect in old age. People commented, "She taught everyone that love is not to serve at any cost," or, "Velma is an example of dignity." Each sentence read aloud seemed to reflect everything I always wanted, to be remembered for what I do well, but also for what I have the courage not to accept. Cassidy shook my hands and said quietly, "Mommy, I'm proud of you. More than any party or recipe, you taught me to be respected and respect others." Daniel approached, put his hand on my shoulder and said to the audience, "This is my mother. She taught me to be a man, to value each person, and to know when to say no. If I'm here today as a whole person, I owe her all of that." My heart was filled with a mixture of emotion, pride, and gratitude. I never screamed. I never needed to attack or demand attention. My victory came with the patience, calmness, and dignity that only long life can teach. While I was signing books, I heard reports from people who identified with my story. An older lady said, "Velma, I've never felt so represented. You showed me that we don't have to be invisible." One young father commented, "My mother would do exactly the same if she had the courage. Thank you for showing us that it is possible to impose yourself without losing tenderness." Each story shared with me that day made me realize that the impact of my decision not to attend Daniel's wedding and to write my memoir was reaching far more than just my family. It was a silent but potent legacy. Cassidy suggested taking some photos, not for social media, but to keep a memory of the moment. I hesitated, but she held my hand gently. In that moment, I felt that everything I had experienced, years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, parties organized alone, had been transformed into something palpable, something that would finally be recognized and valued without any effort to justify it. Every smile, every word of gratitude, every hug showed me that life, with its own time, can give back what the heart gives generously. And as I looked at Daniel and Cassidy, I realized that the relationship we had built had changed for good. They no longer saw me as a mother who was always available to meet expectations or correct mistakes. They saw me as a whole woman who knew how to set limits, who had history, who had dignity, and that was more valuable than any public praise. I had finally found the balance between love and self-respect. As he signed the last copy of the day, Cassidy whispered, "Mom, look at how many people have come for you, for your story. This is just the beginning. And I, looking at the audience full of emotional faces, realized that she was right. What started as a pain, a silent betrayal, had turned into an example of strength and resilience. And at that moment, a phrase echoed in my mind. Life gives back in ways that we never imagine, but always at the right time. It is this truth that I clung to, feeling that all the patience, all the silence, and all the courage I had stored over the years had finally turned into recognition. Silent, yet immensely powerful. And now, as the library emptied and I put away my notepad, I felt that something even bigger was coming. Because this story, which began with an absence and a silent lesson, was just opening doors to new paths of respect, love, and legacy. But what exactly would that mean for my family and the next chapter of my life? Only time would tell, and I couldn't wait to find out. I returned to my home in Charleston at dusk, feeling the warm spring breeze caress my face as I settled into the old rocking chair on the porch. The silence around me was comforting, unlike the frenetic noise of kitchens, parties, and expectations that had accompanied me for decades. I sat down, taking a sip of hot tea, and realized how the silence, which had been pain and frustration for so long, now became my greatest strength. It became a sovereignty, a conscious choice, a space where I could exist without having to please anyone or prove my worth. I looked out over the quiet street, with the colonial houses lined up, flowering gardens, and neighbors walking slowly, each immersed in their own stories. I thought of Frank, my dear husband, and how proud he would have been to see that the Velma he had known, so generous and patient, was now also a woman of clear boundaries and unshakable dignity. His memories came to the surface, his soft laugh, his advice during the days of trouble, the quiet support he always gave me. A mixture of nostalgia and gratitude filled my heart. Inside the house, the kitchen looked different, as if it recognized the change in me. The pots were still hanging, the utensils in the same place, but the environment did not require any more sacrifices from me. I opened the refrigerator and, as a symbolic gesture, wrote a note and pasted it on the door. Helping is choice, not to be used. A reminder to myself, but also in some ways, a silent message to anyone who could read it. This simple act made me feel light, as if I had finally finished carrying the invisible weight that had accompanied me for so many years. I observed the garden, now blooming in vibrant colors. The tulips and roses reminded me of the passage of time, of constant renewal, and that despite the pains and disappointments, there is beauty and life that continues. Each petal seemed to whisper, "You survived. You won gracefully." And it was true. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to demand attention or manipulate the situation. Everything was resolved with patience, dignity, and quiet firmness. I sat down, taking a deep breath, reflecting on everything I'd been through. The years of dedication to Daniel, the warm welcome to Cassidy, the veiled betrayal, the strategic absence, and finally, the rebuilding of respect. Each chapter of my life was marked by choices, some painful, some wise. Silence, which was once a prison, has become a legacy, the most powerful way to teach respect without having to raise your voice. I also thought about the messages of people who, even without knowing me personally, were touched by my story. Women who felt invisible in their families, who sacrificed too much, who had to learn to set limits. The silence I practiced became an example, and my experience could now illuminate other paths, inspire healthier, more conscious choices. As the sky was tinged with orange and pink, I realized that emotional freedom was not the absence of problems, but rather the ability to choose which battles to face, which pains to carry, and which to let go. The scars remained, but they no longer hurt. They served only as reminders of what I learned, of what I overcame. I could laugh, cook, write, live, without feeling guilt or obligation. The wind brought with it the perfume of flowers, and I felt a deep peace. Every decision made in the last few days, every act of silent courage, was reflected in the tranquility of my home, in the serenity of my mind, in the strength of my heart. The past no longer needed to define me. Now I defined the present and the future. And as I got up from the rocking chair, looking out over the street and the garden, I realized that something inside me was flourishing along with the surrounding nature. The Velma who always put others first, who got lost in the demands of others, now existed for herself, but with love, wisdom, and respect. This chosen silence was my greatest legacy, and I couldn't help but wonder, how many more lives could be transformed if each person learned to value their own space, their dignity, and the power to say no when necessary? The answer was yet to come, but I knew that my story, now recorded and lived, could be the spark for many others. The sun slowly set, and I stood there, feeling that finally all the pieces had fallen into place, and that the next chapter in my family's life and my own would be written with respect, love, and awareness. I felt the aroma of tea rising through the kitchen as I settled into my favorite armchair, the same one where I had so often reflected on life, sacrifices, and silent loves that have shaped me. Daniel was calmer, learning to cherish every moment without assuming my availability, and Cassidy, now pregnant, smiled with a tenderness that demanded nothing more than my presence. They finally understood that my generosity came with limits, and that respect is not begged, it is imposed with dignity. The marriage that once almost usurped me, the mistakes of Cassidy and Daniel, and the chaos that followed were turned into profound lessons, and I, after so long, could finally say that I was at peace. My heart, once restless, now rested, knowing that the emotional freedom I gained did not depend on anyone's approval, but on my own courage to say no and respect myself. I learned that true love does not require unfair sacrifices, and that life rewards those who remain true to their own dignity. We can't always change others, but we can choose how to respond. Forgiveness, when necessary, is born of understanding and patience, not of obligation. Every experience, every moment of pain or injustice, becomes a silent teacher, and what really matters is how we turn those lessons into actions that preserve our essence. I realized that setting boundaries doesn't diminish love. On the contrary, it strengthens bonds, creates mutual respect, and allows true generosity to flourish. It's a lesson that applies to any relationship, family, friendship, or community, and one that I hope will resonate with everyone who, like me, has ever felt undervalued or overwhelmed. And that's why I want to thank you for sticking with me so far, listening to this story that's as mine as it can be yours. Each Like You Leave is like a hug that warms and supports this channel. Each subscription is like an invitation to meet again for another coffee, to share stories that touch and inspire us. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching. Let's create this space for exchange and belonging together, a community that respects experiences and shares learning. And don't forget to activate the bell, so you don't miss it when the coffee is ironed again, and you can continue to follow these stories that teach us to live with more awareness and self-love. But life goes on, and with it new stories to tell. As I watch Daniel and Cassidy plan for the future, my grandson about to arrive, I feel that there are still so many memories to record, so many silent teachings to pass on. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story, and allow your soul to once again be moved, learn and connect with the silent strength of those who have lived a lot, and learn to value themselves,